Good evening, Dr. Niznick, and thank you so much for accepting to be with me on my podcast. I've had the opportunity over the years to get to know about you for over 30 years without knowing you in person. So still till now, I have never had the honor to meet you in person, and I thought that let me introduce you properly to the younger generation that didn't
Thank you.
get.
Nice to be with you.
Thank you. So with that, to give a little bit of a brief on your long history, but you are one of the, I call you the pioneer, but you're a legend, in my opinion, and a legend that has never been given all the, what a legend needs to have, all the recognition, because you started an implant called Corvan in 1982, before there was any industry. So
I
that's
started in implants 10 years earlier.
even. So there you go.
Involved in implants for over 50 years.
Yeah. So that's exactly why I think that we need to talk about it. But your genius was it in mainly when you created an internal hex, when nobody believed in internal hex, and I grew up that everything should be external hex. So you revolutionized this, and it proved that you were right and everybody was wrong. And actually, your internal hex that you created is the most copied in the world. There's not one implant company that doesn't have the same internal hex that you created.
Well, I developed that in 86. I started Corvent in 82,
Yeah.
but that implant just had a hex hole in it.
Uh-huh.
And you use that hex hole to screw the implant in, then you could cement a variety of abutments. So what I really introduced was application-specific abutments. Prior to that time, you had a post with a screw and no angle, or that's about all you could do. Either a one-piece implant like a blade where you could maybe bend the head and then hope it didn't break, or a one piece with a screw. So by having a hex hole that I could put a variety of abutments in, I created implant prosthodontics, really, back in 82.
Sure.
And in 86, I launched the screw vent with a lead-in bevel, 45-degree lead-in bevel internal hex, that you can have the features of the internal, but the detachability of screw retained. And then I had to make a whole bunch of abutments that would work with that. So that's really what started it off. But everybody was saying that Brånemark external hex was the gold standard at that time.
Correct.
And not until my patent expired in 2007 was Nobel allowed to bring their Nobel active into this country. So,
Correct.
And that's the lead-in bevel internal hex. It can be any angle bevel. It can be any kind of internal wrench engaging surface. It doesn't have to be a hex. The patent covered all of that.
So talking about patent, you have 33 patents.
And 3 more pending.
Yes. And you have probably a lot of them now that they expired. They are used by all the implant companies.
Yes.
People don't know that. And you've started the wide diameter implant before anybody spoke about that.
Yeah.
And the mini one, which was the 3.25, which is amazing. And then you introduced the HA coating, and then you modified it. That became MTX with Zimmer later on. And that now it's basically every implant has the same surface, but called differently, RBT, RBM, whatever they
RBM,
call it.
that's what it is blasted with HA. Instead of blasted with aluminous oxide. SLA, sandblasted large grit acid etch from Straumann is blasting with aluminous oxide, but you got to acid etch to get the particles off. And that rounds the threads. But if you blast with hydroxyl apatate crystals, which is soluble in citric acid, which doesn't affect the metal, you can maintain the sharpness of the threads in the cutting groove and still end up with the same textured surface.
So this did not stop here. Your implant company got acquired at the end by Zimmer. And then after that, you started another implant company called Implant Direct. And want to open a little bit of parenthesis on it. You prove to everybody that you can reduce the cost so drastically that you can have an implant that is cheap. And although you don't agree with the word disruptor, but you have pushed the implant companies, the big implant companies, to actually acquire subprime implants that you can see Straumann, they have Neodent and all of them. So that was also a huge thing that you've done into the industry.
I'm credited with creating the value segment.
Correct, the value
And,
segment, yes.
and how do you create a value segment? You have to build value into your implant. So what I did then, which I'm not doing now, is that I had all-in-one packaging. Would give you a Healy collar, a cover screw, a transfer, an abutment, all in the same package, so that you didn't need to figure out what all goes with what, and do it all for one
price.
reasonable price
Yeah.
of 150 or 175.
Yeah, and that's by itself it put the whole industry in a challenge to compete with it. And then you sold that implant.
Yes.
And now we are in a new era that you are starting, and we will talk about that. But what made Dr. Niznick do what you did? How did you start? How did you come up with it? And that's it's so interesting to know.
At what point?
Exactly.
Because I've reinvented this thing so many times.
Yeah.
Basically, I've been associated with 5 different companies, because first was the Corvent, and then Dentsply came along in 91, and they distributed my product for a period of time. And then I took it back from them in 97 and called it Paragon. And then I sold that to Zimmer and started Implant Direct, which I sold to Danaher, or Cybron. So I've reinvented this thing. And what's the driving force? That's a good question. The need. There's a need there, and nobody was filling it. Today, the most frustrating thing is to see the new implants that each company is bringing out. BioHorizons just came out with a new implant. Zimmer took the TSV and called it a TSX. Implant Direct took the legacy and combined it with my interactive and came up with the iconic. I said they should call it the ironic. So when I see these companies going in the wrong direction with their product development and coming up with a new product just to justify a price increase, and then they get all the paid opinion leaders behind them saying this is great, it just frustrates me. So I just said, I can do it better. And I had, I owned the factory that I built in 94, and I leased it to Zimmer, and I leased it Implant Direct, but I kept it. I wouldn't lease it out to anybody else the last 8 years. And it's just sitting there. And I said, well, I got the factory. I've got in Vegas, I had the shipping facility and lecture. It's part of a business complex, a real estate complex that I have. I had the customer service area in another area building. So I had all the facilities. I knew that a good number of my employees would come back to work for me because I treat them right and they want to be associated with a winning company. So I had all the ingredients to get back. The non-compete expired. I said, let's do it.
I mean, that's commendable. I mean, but you said something very interesting, is the need that frustrates you and that makes you come back and do more. So, you know, in my older age, I studied business and a dual thing with healthcare. And what I realized that we have these people that get into the companies, or even this academician, the same story. They don't have the business knowing how to do things, and otherwise knows the business but don't know the science, and they start making all of these things that you have mentioned, and that push down onto as a clinician, all of these products. why do you think for somebody who's watching, a clinician, doesn't know much about business and stuff, why do you think they do all of these things?
Here's the answer. I coined the expression organic incompetence. And I told the last company I was with, I says, you have organic incompetence. I said, somebody is appointed at a high level and he needs to pick the general manager of the company. But he doesn't know what that general manager really needs to know. So he's not qualified to hire that person. So he hires somebody that is not competent to run the whole show. That person doesn't know. So he hires a product manager and he's not smart enough to know what the product manager's supposed to know. So you build organic incompetence all the way up in an organization like that. When you're an entrepreneur and start the way I did, with just practicing and lecturing and designing and my wife taking orders on the phone, I said, you have to, and you build it up to a 400-person company, you have to know every step of the way what needs to be done, from a regulatory, from a manufacturing, from a design, from a clinical standpoint. So I have organic competence versus most of the competitors, which have organic incompetence. And you can explain it to them. You can say, look, this isn't the right way to do it, but they don't hear you. That doesn't register because their engineering group told them this is the way it should be. Well, who picked that engineering group?
Yeah, you're right. You're right. And I've seen it in a lot of projects that I got involved in the same story. So basically, that's the drive for you. That's what makes you
our motto with the company is simply smarter. I trademarked simply smarter. So I just like to show people I'm simply smarter than what these other companies are doing. And I can do it at a better price because I don't have all the high priced executives. I have branding because of my name and reputation. So I don't have to be running international symposiums with paid opinion leaders flown all over the place. So I can run the business more economically, and I can therefore keep the price down.
And that's amazing in the business world. So since we're talking about organic incompetence, so you know that dentistry, when you started doing it and when I started doing it, and now it's totally different. We have a world of corporate that is taking over all the practices and hiring the new graduates and so on and so forth. Don't you think that this is the same problem is going to happen also into the practices that they've been built in corporate?
You know, in a way, it's good for these young dentists to have a job and to start right away and focus on practicing dentistry and not on hiring front desk girls and dealing with all the elements. So in one way, it's good. The problem is that these corporate offices are driven by profits. So they're more into what's the best price they can buy something rather than what's the best product they're buying. But they do a lot of training for their dentists. So in a way, it's good, and it's not necessarily for everybody, but I think for some people, it's a very good way for them to practice. So it's up to me and people like me to get to the right people that are running those organizations and explain to them what is the right procedures to be done to be clinically successful. Because if they're not clinically successful, they pay a big price in their profitability and having to redo cases in litigation, etc.
Correct. Which in a way, your customers in general, they were always, you appeal to the general dentist that wanted to do surgery. You did never target the specialist, although you had a lot of specialists that used your product, but that was not your thing. And why is that? Why do you think that it was better to target directly to the dentist? And
because the specialists were in the 90s, 80s, 90s, 2000, they're victims of salespeople. A salesperson will go to their restorative doctor and say, look, I'll give you a free abutment and I'll come here and show you how to do a transfer if you'll tell your surgeon to buy my implants. So then the surgeon ends up having to buy 4 different systems to satisfy all of his restorative doctors, and he becomes the victim to the salesperson. My idea of all-in-one packaging is, hey, the GP doesn't need a salesperson to hold our hand if everything that he gets is in that package. And we had it set up that if the surgeon took that implant, put the implant in, he had a patient label he could put on that vial, and he sent the vial over to the restorative doctor and gave him the transfer and everything. And then we had videotapes and lectures. So I thought that I could actually help the surgeons break that chain of control with the salespeople. But what we found, and I started out Implant Direct with the intent of not having any salespeople, but we ended up with 70 outside salespeople and 70 inside. And the reason is that when we converted a Nobel customer, the Nobel salesperson would go in right after us and convert them back and badmouth us. So we needed our own salespeople. If we're going to go after the specialists, we needed our salespeople in that office. The GPs just wanted something good at a good price to work for, and that's why I had the largest GP market in the industry with Implant Direct, and we had a decent number of specialists as well.
Good. So that's
I used to say,
yeah,
I have a niche market. The niche market is discerning dentists. If you're discerning, you're going to use my product. If you're not discerning, then
I'm not for you.
Not my market.
So since you created Implant Direct and then you sold it to Danaher
and
so,
now it's owned by Envista. They broke that off and went public as Envista.
And they spun it off. Same thing.
And Envista owns Nobel. So now you got my company, Nobel, owned by the same company.
Interesting.
They make some of the same, our abutments, which fit my interactive, are FDA approved to fit the Nobel Active, but they don't tell their customers that because they want to sell their $300 abutment instead of my $150, but they both would fit the same implant.
Interesting. That's for the Nobel Active. Yes.
Yes.
Well, see, this is the importance of the podcast. You can also, a lot of people will hear about these things that they didn't know about. So do you think, what do you envision is going to happen with this mergers and these spinning out like they happened with Zimmer became ZimV now?
Yeah,
I don't know who told them to make that name.
Zimmer may be bought by the Korean company Ostem. That's been published that Ostem is making an offer on them. The companies cannot sustain $550 implant prices, and so they discount. Or you're special, we're going to give you 30% off. So now it's only costing you $350, which is $200 too much. So what's going to happen? The market is expanding. A rising tide lifts all boats. So Straumann had a fabulous year. They grew over 10 or 11%. Nobel is doing well too. And so there's more and more dentists placing implants, and that covers up a lot of the problems that they would otherwise have with their high price. And then they sell a high-priced implant and a cheap implant. I'll give you an example. Neodent sells in United States for $235. What do you think that implant sells for in Brazil?
Oh, I'm sure it's 3/4 less.
$23.
$23.
You can go online, Neodent, Brazil, look at their shopping cart and translate the dollar value. So people think, oh, I'm buying a Neodent, it's $235, but I'm getting it for $150 or $125. I'm getting a great deal. They must really like me. Well, they're buying a $23 implant if they bought it in Brazil.
Yeah.
So these companies have, and I want to have an online company. How do I make a top of the line product and be able to sell it for $100? Because that's the target price of my new implant.
Mm-hmm.
And the way to do it is, one, have a narrow product line. What happened, and I ended up with 17 different implants in Implant Direct. I would make one that was compatible with Straumann, with Nobel, with Astra, whatever. We kept adding products to get different segments of the market.
Mm-hmm.
So the key is to have a very narrow product line. So when you set up a machine to run a part, you don't have to break it down to run a healing collar on a machine that you just made an implant on.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll have a very narrow product line, and this including things in the packaging was what Implant Direct did, but now I'm including nothing in it. And the reason is that a lot of times, even if you include a cover screw,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times the dentist is not going to use the cover screw. He's going to put a multi-unit abutment on it right away, or put a healing collar or something. And if you put a healing collar and a cover screw, the healing collar may not be the right height. It might be a 3 millimeter and you need a 5.
Correct.
This time I said, I'm going bare bones. I'm going to drop the price, and I'm going to just include in the package what you need, and everything else you can buy as you need it. So it becomes a cost savings. Very efficient manufacturing, lights out manufacturing, so that we can go home at night, turn the lights out, and the machines run all night. We're the only ones in the industry, other than Implant Direct, had it. I don't know if they're still using it, but aftermarket components on every machine that cost me about $45,000 per machine monitors the machine and allows you to run lights out. Efficient manufacturing, a narrow product line, and just what you need in the package. That's the formula for a low price. And then online shopping to save the expense of the salespeople.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need a salesperson walking in and trying to sell you, give you a bulk discount, so that he loads up your shelf, so the next salesman that comes in, you won't buy from him. Why spend that money on inventory when you can go online and get just what you want when you want it? So
you can give it overnight. Yeah. So
right.
Yeah.
So all this combination is how to make it less expensive for the dentist, reduce the number of abutments they need by reducing the number of platforms. We used to have 4, we're down to 2. Now some companies have gone to 1, and they think that's a big advantage, and it's a big mistake. Straumann, Neodent, they're down to 1 platform, all the Israeli implants. And why is it a mistake? Because you got a 3.3 implant with a hole in the center, a lead-in bevel, a hex, and an abutment. What happens when you got a 5.5 implant? Now you got a weak abutment that could break in the molar area if it's under high load, and you've created a bad emergence profile. You got a big ledge on it, a narrow abutment and a big ledge on the implant, very poor emergence profile. So the right combination of a couple of platform diameters, and you can improve hygiene and emergence profile and still keep the number of parts to a minimal.
But you know that one of the reasons that they said that having these kind of a platform switch, that we went through this for a long time, and now nobody talks about it. What's your take on that platform switch?
Platform switch is a myth. It's a myth created by 3i. Yes. When 3i had an external hex implant, that's Implant Innovations, which is now part of Zimmer Biomet, when they had a 4 millimeter Bronnemark clone hex, and they wanted to make a wider implant, they made because they were having loose screws. So that external hex was wobbling, the screw would come, said, okay, let's make a wider implant to be more stable. But they didn't have all the wider abutments. So they were putting 4 millimeter abutments on the 5 millimeter implant. And Tarno said, you medialized the junction. That's why we were getting less bone loss. Well, there was no less bone loss. that was ever measured. I cite a study that shows that platform switching does nothing to reduce bone loss. Really, any internal conical connection is a platform switch because you got the internal bevel, and then you got the wall. So you got a little something.
You had it with your 3.7. You had a 3.5 internal hex and a 3.7.
Right.
So
that's but it doesn't mean anything because
anything.
all of that had to do with the sloppy external hex. Once you went internal hex, it really doesn't matter. So there's a lot of sacred cows like platform switching, hydrophilic surfaces. Don't mean anything. Now everybody's got hydrophilic surface. Straumann built their whole business on a one bullshit study by Boozer and Cochrane showing that if the torque removal over an 8-week period, there was a dip. If it was hydrophilic surface, there was a little dip in the amount of retention torque to remove it. But it didn't matter because either you had enough stability to load it immediately, or you're going to wait 8 weeks anyways. So whatever is occurring in the middle didn't mean much.
That brings us to the elitist thinking, right? That's we know it better. So you kind of changed the whole game when you created your internal hex. When everybody was talking about gold standard external, how did you come up with this? This is what fascinates me.
Well, I had an internal hex on the Corvette, just a hex. And it was for cemented abutments. Well, I wanted to have a screw retained abutment. So I had to put internal threads. And from my crown and bridge experience, I knew that a beveled margin was better than a butt joint. You don't make a butt joint other than on a all porcelain jacket, which nobody does anymore. We always put a beveled margin. So I said, okay, I'm going to create a 45-degree lead-in bevel. Now, my patent covered any angle of bevel. You could have 78, 82, like Straumann. BioHorizons now got 82.5. But as you increase the angle, you thin the walls of the implant.
Correct.
And you drop the hex farther down, so you make a short implant. So 45 degrees is enough to give you the lateral stability, and yet it doesn't compromise the thickness of the walls.
So basically what you did is you thought about the implant from a prosthetic point of view.
Yes.
And move forward. And that's I mean, you don't need me to tell you the great thinking that you are, but we went full circle in dentistry and we're back to prosthetically driven. So think about it, where the end result is going to be, and you see if you have the bone to place the implant. So that proved that you proved it way many years ago, and then you implemented and it became copied. So now that you've done all of these things, now you have a new project, and I'm dying to know about it. I know that you went out in it, so it exists. It's an implant, you call it Implant Paragon, right?
Paragon. I took the name back that I had in 97, Paragon. And the implant I called GEN5, Generation 5. Core vent was Gen 1, straight screw vent was Gen 2, Gen 3 was the tapered screw vent, Gen 4 was the legacy from Implant Direct, and a screw vent with micro threads, and the Gen 5 is entirely different, but it's in the same family. The body is the same as the legacy. Double lead threads, which was another patent. So when you start the threads at 2 different places on the implant, so when you screw it in, it goes down twice as fast. Tapered for bone expansion. And then what I really changed was the neck. I got rid of the micro threads and I created a 2.5 millimeter anodized, relatively smooth neck. Why? Because peri-implantitis is really the hot topic today. So many people, experienced, inexperienced, are putting in implants anywhere they can. and patients aren't maintaining as well as they should. So you're getting peri-implantitis which is biological complications. You got mechanical complications, but you can take care of that if you design the implant right, you use the right materials. But biological, you want to put an implant into an extraction socket. Well, some of the implant is going to be exposed right away. Or you could put a bone graft on it, but a lot of that's going to melt away. So you're going to end up with the rough surface, threads and blasted surface exposed. Biofilm will form on that. And also, when you curette a rough surface, titanium particles have been shown to get embedded in the soft tissue, and that can lead to inflammation. So the key to my new system is a 2.5 millimeter smooth neck with score lines at 1 and 2 millimeters, and 2.5 is where the blasted surface starts. This is not only good for peri-implantitis, it's good for vertical flexibility. Now, why do you need vertical flexibility? The ridges are seldom even. Unless you take a lower jaw, take out all the teeth and flatten the lower jaw, you're going to end up with ridges that are higher on the mesial and distal and lower in the labial. So what are dentists doing? They're pushing the implants subcrestal to get that blasted surface away from the gingival sulcus. But let me tell you that the bone will follow that junction down. You won't get osseointegration above the implant abutment junction. So all you're doing is creating a defect, and the bone will eventually drop down to it. So my idea is it goes back to the core vent. The core vent, when we placed the implant in, we placed it 1 millimeter above the bone. Why did I do that? We were burying it, and I want to make it easy to find. So I could run my finger along the tissue and feel where the implant is, then make a little opening of the tissue with a high-speed burr, drop that burr into the plastic plug and pull it out. And without disturbing the tissue, I could cement the abutment. So if you keep the implant 1 millimeter above the bone, there's many advantages. One, your junction is not near the crest of the ridge. Two, you get soft tissue attachment to that 1 millimeter that will not be disturbed when you're changing transfers and abutments. That goes along with the Nobel on one theory of attaching a healing collar, and that becomes your transmucosal base of the abutment. So you want to get that junction up a little bit from the bone, or if you've got a sloped ridge, you want to be able to place the implant level on the lingual and still have a smooth neck exposed on the labial. Minimizing peri-implantitis, minimizing the need for bone grafting, simplifying the procedure. When you put an implant subcrestal, and I can see it every time I'm looking at healed tissue, you got that implant in a one big deep hole. Okay, well, that's not easy to attach your abutments, and not easy for the patient to keep it clean. So you want to get that junction up where you can see it and keep it clean. So the longer neck is now we've got drill stops that will give you the choice. Do I want to place it level, or do I want to place it 1 millimeter above? And those drill stops are matched in diameter to the sleeve that goes into the surgical tray. So you go right through the surgical tray with your drill stop and bump into the bone and stop if you want 1 millimeter above. So vertical flexibility, minimizing peri-implantitis, minimizing the number of platforms, bringing it down to 2 from the 4 that I had before. That's only one of the 3 new implants. I got 3 new implants. I take the same implant and I friction fit a 2 millimeter healing collar onto it. A 2 millimeter healing collar. Now, what that does, it's like buying an implant and putting Nobel on one on it. It gets you up, if the tissue's thicker, gets you up closer, gets you to a tissue level implant if between adjusting the height of the neck and the 2 millimeters. But this collar is friction fitted. So it comes attached to the implant. You need a tool to separate it. Unlike Nobel, where you have to buy the on one and attach it, hold it in with a screw. and then your abutment screws into the top of that screw. This is like a one-piece implant that can be reverted back to a
Two
two-piece.
pieces.
And that diameter of that platform matches the Nobel multi-unit abutment diameter.
So if you want to use all on X,
So you can just put a screw in the center and convert it to a multi-unit abutment.
Interesting.
So now your inventory is not abutments of different collar heights. It's just $25 screws of different heights to reduce the inventory.
Wow.
All been thought of.
You're going to make a lot of friends for yourselves.
And the third implant is the best. I saved the best for last.
Last, huh?
When
are you going to launch it?
Well, the end of this year. I call it the Nizplant.
The Nizplant. Ah, that's nice. Yeah.
And what this is a one-piece implant with a locator top. It'll take all locator attachments or attachments that we'll provide. But it also is a multi-unit abutment. So it's got internal threads and a lead-in bevel on the inside. So you could put 4 implants in, convert it to an overdenture, come back a year later and convert it to a fixed case without changing anything.
Wow. That is unbelievable. Wow. You know, the funny thing that
Simply smarter.
I know. But one thing that I missed
to
mention is that you created tapered implants. Yes. And that's what we missed. I apologize for that. This is major because you push the whole industry into the tapered, and that's people don't realize that how creative you were when you created the TSV, and that was the first. And not only that, every time you make the thread, it was going 1.5 down because of the
3. I had triple lead threads.
Yeah, the triple lead. Yeah. So that I apologize, and that was when back in the day that what turned me into TSV, and I was a big user for it for the longest until that merger took place. So so you know, Dr. Niznick, is always fascinating to listen to you and to watch you how you keep doing. You are not doing it for the money, you know. I see your jets in the back. I always heard about your private jets. So you're not somebody who's doing it for the money. Thank God you're prosperous and you've done it very well for yourself, and you have a beautiful family. That's what I hear all the time.
In 3 days, I celebrate my 60th wedding anniversary.
There you go. So that's a great blessing.
My wife said, I took you for better or worse, but not lunch.
What, doesn't she tell you, how can I turn you off a little bit or no?
No, she lets me do my thing.
That's good. That's good. That's the success of the marriage, you know. Yeah. So I really want to thank you for making the time. I know you're a busy guy, but I want to tell everybody that really you are fascinating. You have all the time to read, to check. You've poked me on LinkedIn on it, and I appreciate that. That's how we ended up having this podcast, because you didn't like that organic incompetence. Let's put it in a polite way. When I did one of my podcasts, and here we are, and I'm very grateful for that, because I always wanted to meet you, but I never had the opportunity. So thank you very much, and I'm sure that everybody will enjoy listening to it. And I wish you all the success with this one.
Thank you. I would advise going to my website, paragon-implant.com. There's all kinds of videos, video on the new system, interviews, and I think you'll get a lot out of the literature reviews. So, and also I've got a section in there, analysis of the shortcomings of, and I list 12 different systems. I've analyzed every system. Now look, they all work if you know how to master that particular procedure, but it doesn't mean that you can't get better results, easier results with smarter implants. So visit my website. Thanks to you for interviewing me. I appreciate it. Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
We'll take your first order on GEN5.
I bet we'll do. All righty. Thank you so much, Doctor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.